and welcome back to Secrets of Social Impact Communicators. I'm your host, Nate Burt. So happy to be with you. Just a few notes before we get into today's episode. I want to remind you that if you have not gone to my website and subscribed to my free email newsletter, please do so. Just go to silvermaplestrategies.com. Again, silvermaplestrategies.com. While you're there, you can check out the books tab where you'll find out more information on my latest book, 7 Secrets of Highly Effective Social Impact Communicators. This is really my framework for leading social impact efforts, whether you're in climate change or DEI or any number of other issues that our world needs your help on. I also want to invite you to check out today's episode. Tamika Bickham is founder, CEO, and creative director at TB Media Group. I think you're really going to enjoy our conversation where we focus on the value of authenticity in storytelling and building connection and community. Tamika has an incredible story of leadership. She's a former TV journalist and now leads branded content with a variety of efforts, many of them social purpose focused. I hope you'll enjoy our conversation. Take a listen. Welcome back to Secrets of Social Impact Communicators. I'm your host, Nate Burt, and with me today, I am thrilled to have Tamika Bickham, founder and CEO, as well as creative director of TB Media Group. Tamika, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Nate. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And you actually reached out, and I think it's fun. We both have journalism backgrounds. You've taken your career in a really interesting direction that is highly relevant in today's market, which is the wide world of video. And I wonder if you could just start off, Tamika, telling us a little bit about yourself and the origin story of TB Media Group.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for asking. And I love that we both have the journalism backgrounds. And I feel like a lot of us are kind of ending up on a similar path here. Why wouldn't we end up, hosting podcasts and having more conversations?
That's right.
So my background started in broadcast journalism. And I know before we hit record here, we were talking about our J schools. I went to University of Miami and ended up kind of hooking me here due to the weather. But after moving around to a couple of TV markets, Montgomery, Alabama, and then back to South Florida, I feel like I always say this, I got into journalism because I love storytelling, but I got out of journalism because I love storytelling. And that's not to knock journalism. Like, I feel I still have a lot of respect for the field. It has just changed so much. And for me, I always wanted to be on investigations or special projects or more long form storytelling where I feel like I could dig deeper and really, kind of make more of a greater impact rather than, especially when I got back to Miami, where it's kind of like the if it bleeds, it leads type of mentality. And you're just constantly chasing crime day in and day out. So I couldn't do it anymore. And I left that role, but I actually ended up going into nonprofit arts. So actually in college, I was a double major in broadcast journalism and theater. And I've always had a passion for the nonprofit space, for the arts as well. So I felt like I was kind of able to marry those two interests and degrees that I got in my past experiences and actually go into nonprofit arts as a storyteller and content creator. And this was actually in 2015, going into 2016, where you could really start to see the evolution of now social media, what that meant to organizations, to brands, and also kind of less of a need for traditional media. Brands now say, hey, we don't need traditional media as much as we did in the past. We can cut out the middleman and we can talk directly to our audiences. But that means that we need employees on staff or a team to help us shape our messaging, to create content, supply that content to push out to our audiences. So I started doing that in-house, and born out of kind of doing that day in and day out when I was at the New World Symphony, that's actually where I met my first client very organically. I was actually shooting a story for the symphony, and my first client said, hey, we need a video from you. And I said, okay, well, actually, at first I said no, because I was like, no, I don't have a business. And then they asked again, hey, we really need this video. So I said, sure, why not? And that was really how TB Media Group started.
I love it. That's a great story, Tamika. And I love, again, just your passion for storytelling. And I think you're right. I see a real resurgence of people who are still using that journalistic skill set, but in new and exciting ways. And to your point, leveraging this wide world of nonprofits and social impact, which I know we're going to get into a lot here momentarily, but that's sort of a serendipitous turn of events that led you into the career that you're enjoying today. And I love that story. Talk a little bit about when you first knew you wanted to do purpose-driven work, and maybe a little bit about what excites you in the corporate social responsibility ESG space.
I think it was, to answer your question, sure, I think it was something that I always knew, because as a journalist, it was like, I always wanted to tell stories that mattered to my community. I wanted to tell stories that connected with my audience's emotions, that helped them see a new perspective, learn something new. So that was always there. It was more so finding the opportunities to do it in that were outside of local TV news. And I think that took a little fumbling around, whereas in the beginning, I told you TV Media Group started very organically. It wasn't my plan until I realized, hey, I actually like doing this. And I will say that very first project ended up being very impact driven to me, and it was very rewarding. But then as I, a couple of years later, actually got laid off from my full-time job, fast forward a couple of jobs, and I said, okay, well, I'm going to try to grow this business. And at that point, I got into, okay, doing videos for law firms, doing videos for, different businesses where the heart and soul just wasn't quite as apparent. And that's not to say that it doesn't exist.
Sure.
I'm not knocking law firms, but I just knew that the type of storytelling that I wanted to do was aligned for a certain type of client. And that was really a client that was creating change, new initiatives, and really wanted to do that on a larger scale, and needed to communicate that in a crafty way, and not necessarily just, let's say, creating marketing videos that are generating leads on YouTube, which is definitely not what me and my team do.
Thank you for that background, Tamika, and just helping us understand what the journey was like. And like you said, for small business owners, yourself and myself included, there's a lot of learning and a lot of falling down and getting back up again and learning what works and what the market needs, right? And I think you're right. There's such a tremendous need for this kind of soul-driven storytelling that you're describing. You are a video expert, and I'm curious from your perspective in 2024, as we're recording this, what do you see as sort of the key strengths of video as a platform for storytelling? And then what are some of the watchouts? I'm especially thinking of deepfakes, artificial intelligence, and I believe personally, and I think my clients believe, that there is true value in human-centered storytelling that leverages tools like video. But there are some watchouts. So help us understand what's working and maybe what watchouts are for those who are out there listening.
Okay, can we talk about the watchouts first?
Let's do it.
That is top of mind. And I love that. I feel like people on our side are always like, we got to watch out for AI. I mean, that's rapidly evolving. I can't even say that I'm truly like at the forefront of all that's happening there, other than kind of testing out some new softwares that might be beneficial. And I think my thoughts, I mean, that's the biggest one that comes to mind for me, right? Like, you have AI that can edit videos, that can put captions on your videos. And I think a lot of that is actually good in some ways, right? Like, can we streamline processes? Can we get these tedious tasks done? I even still think about myself. I very often, I still transcribe by hand almost all of my interviews. And I know that there are tools that can do this, but I also know, the way that I'm downloading the information, so to speak, and absorbing it as I'm reviewing it in real time and logging it in real time, a computer can't do that for me. So it's just more productive for me to actually do it myself. So I say all of that because I think there are tools that are going to be beneficial, that allow us to streamline our processes, to work quicker, to keep some costs down in certain areas. But a computer's I might be kicking myself here, but a computer can still not tell a story that is completely 100% authentic and unique to your brand and your story.
Right.
Because again, when we do this work, we don't just get it right on the first try, right? There's a conversation, there's a collaboration that happens there. There's a back and forth, there's an understanding that needs to happen. There's layers that need to be peeled back. And I don't know, and that this may all change, but I don't know that right now there is a tool that can do that to the level of human thinking. So I think my watch out with that is knowing what you need in terms of video and understanding what tools are appropriate to use. Is it streamlined getting captions on there? Is it streamlining like taking an hour-long video and chopping that into little 30-second, 60-second clips? And I think AI is perfectly fine for that.
Sure.
But I think if you're saying, hey, I need to fundraise $3 million and create, or go on this capital fundraising campaign where we really need to speak to the emotions of our donors and potential donors, then you really have to look at what tools and team are required to do that adequately.
Yeah, those are great points, Tamika. Thank you for raising those. And I think you're right. I was recently working on some copy for my website, or just sort of as my business evolves, trying to explain what I do. And I think you're right. I sort of took a round where I recorded myself talking, and then I had ChatGPT sort of organize the information. And my business coach looked at it and said, this is fine. It's got a lot of the basic details that you need, but it has no heart or soul. And so going back and sort of recrafting everything through my own lens, I think there's so much truth to what you said in terms of getting that download yourself. And again, everyone's process will differ. And I think, like you said, our use of the technology will evolve, but recognizing it as a utility, not a blanket device for solving all of the world's problems, especially when it comes to something as sensitive as a lot of these topics are, I think those are really wise words. So thank you for sharing that. So talk about what's working with video now. What is making this a platform that really has staying power among audiences?
I always go back to authenticity, and that word keeps coming up. I feel like that never goes out of style. There will always be new edits and animations and tricks and tools or transitions and fun things that we can do in terms of bringing a story to life visually. But I feel like when I even coach some people through video, I'm like, what always matters most in that is the story. Because I think about my favorite documentaries and things that I get locked into. And at the end of the day, I watch from beginning to end because that story is good. And there are plenty of docs that are like the quality is poor. I'm not advocating for poor quality, but some of these docs, depending on where they were, like they didn't have time to set, you're needing to respond in the moment, and you love it because the story itself is so good. So I think the story always trumps all of the tricks and tools and everything else there. So as much as we can keep the story at the center of what we're doing and authenticity at the center of what we're doing, that will never go out of style. So to me, that's what's working.
Yeah, no, I love that, Tamika. And I love that timelessness of a really powerful story well told. And certainly the production values and all those things play a role. But you're right. Story is central, especially when it comes to engaging people's hearts and minds. And not only that, but moving people to take action, which I think is probably the most challenging piece of any of that. And that leads us to our next question. One of the topics you mentioned wanting to discuss further was sort of how video can build unequivocal support for a mission or an organization. What are the hallmarks or traits of a video that really achieves those objectives?
Yeah, I think it's the simple fact that you are showing instead of just telling. And it's not someone and hopefully it shouldn't be, it's not always somebody from your staff or your organization who is showing and telling, right? So we want to be able to show and tell the impact that your organization is making, but through the eyes of those that are experiencing that on the receiving end of that. And there is really only one medium in which you can feel, you can hear, I guess you can't smell, but like all of the senses
Sure.
essentially come to life through video. And hey, we all have our different platforms and mediums that we like. I'm not a big pick up a book person. Like that's just never been who I am. I know we all have our preferences, but when it comes to actually conveying emotions, conveying a story, and conveying impact exactly in the tone that you want it to be received. And I think that can only be done through video. And there's something powerful about that. And I actually read a stat, I wish I had it up, but it says something like when people watch video, it activates like the mirror neurons in their brains, the people who are watching it. So if you are advocating for something good, let's just keep it simple around like, hey, let's picking our trash up and recycling, and you're actually showing a story around that, the person watching that is more likely to take on that positive action as well when they see it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, thank you for sharing that, both the how of it and also the sort of the research-driven nature of just how we as human beings take in information and interact with it and decide what to do with it. I think that's really something that's easy to overlook, but a really powerful reason to prioritize video-based storytelling. Tamika, we hear a lot, especially in the environmental space where I spend a lot of my time, about terms like greenwashing, green wishing. So there's a lot of perception both among corporate executives, government agencies, the general public, that not every story they're hearing about an organization's stewardship or environmental ethic is truthful, or it's being misrepresented. And I'm curious, how do you navigate some of those perceptions with video in a way that's authentic and also acknowledges the complexities of a social impact journey for an organization, which has fits and starts and successes and failures?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I certainly don't work in the environmental space as much. And I so appreciate that you do. I'd love to pick your brain around that. And it can be very detrimental, right? If you're overstating what you are actually doing within your organization. But I actually was talking about this example the other day, and one of our clients, a tech startup, the name is Sarah, Critical Event Response Applications. And this app was made by law enforcement for law enforcement because he was one of the first responders who responded to the Fort Lauderdale airport shooting, and also Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. So experienced firsthand what communication failures in law enforcement can lead to, because we saw the statistics. We saw it in Las Vegas shooting, in Uvalde, we saw it in MSD, and this was not a gun control issue at all with this app. This was more about response. And we saw that the number one cause of death in these mass shootings was actually due to bleeding out. So his initiative was really about how can we shrink down that response time so that these victims can get aid and get the help that they need faster. And the reason that law enforcement was not, in many of these cases, not able to get in faster is due to radios aren't working, right? The systems are clogged. They're working with archaic systems and tools. And a lot of the new applications that have come out are more panic apps, right? That deal with, hey, we want to bypass 911 and we want to activate a button, but it's not fixing the communications infrastructure on law enforcement side. So that was really his initiative. And sorry, I know I went into a longer explanation there, but I say that because we produced a story around the why, and obviously had a personal connection being a first responder. But in that story, we also had one of the teachers and one of the students who survived the shooting, who were in one of the rooms, who survived the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. And it's a question that has come up. How did you approach that? Does that feel opportunistic? Like, hey, can you be in this piece and tell your story? And are we just taking that story and pairing that next to, this is why you need this technology, right? And that wasn't the case at all. There was actually an established relationship between all parties. There was actually, in a way, this kind of organic 360 storytelling, because you had different perspectives from the law enforcement side, from the student, from the teacher, and they were all in a way brought together at the same event that actually happened. And then they had also formed a relationship around the advisory board for this company as well. So I think the only way to make those types of situations feel authentic and appropriate is when it actually is true. The relationship actually exists. The work you're actually doing is you're doing exactly what you say you're doing. It's 100% accurate. So I think that's the key thing. Like, just mean what you say what you mean.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's not oversimplifying it.
No, I don't think so, Tamika. And I appreciate that example, because I think you're right. I think what that instance shows of this organization developing around the technology, firsthand experience, being first responders with awful school shootings, and then trying to find practical solutions that could potentially help response be faster, more effective, save more lives, is really powerful. And it goes to this idea that you've described, which is sort of less aspirational and more actual, right? What is actually happening? What impact are you having? And having some of those voices come forward about either experience benefits or potential benefits based on the product or service or whatever it is that you're offering. I think that's such a powerful concept that's easy to overlook at a time when investors and regulators and others are wanting organizations to have some of these big picture goals, environmental or otherwise. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it also leads, I think, to a temptation from a storytelling standpoint to maybe reach beyond what the data or information you have actually says.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's go on and let's talk a little bit about, trends. And we've probably addressed some of this already, but I'd love for you, Tamika, to speak a little bit about trends that you see coming in video-based storytelling over the next 12 to 18 months. If I'm a communications executive or a CEO at an organization, what should I be thinking about, looking at, investing in over the next couple of years?
When I get this question, I always think about, hey, what are your goals first and foremost? I always go back to that just because, yes, I think it's always worthwhile to invest in video, but I'm not always going to say, hey, this is necessarily the first thing or even the second thing you need to do. So one of the things, though, that I will say, I'm laughing because I'm thinking of certain scenarios.
That's okay.
But that I'm loving that I'm seeing that's on the rise is brand funded content, right? This like brand sponsored content. And I think we've seen a few do this pretty successfully. And I'm trying to think of the example. I know her name is Amanda Brookman, I want to say. It was like a small town entrepreneur. I have to remember I'll have to look it up, the name of the documentary, but I think she was the chief marketing officer, pretty much took their entire budget and said, hey, we're not doing anything that we did before, and took their entire marketing budget and allocated it towards basically producing this video series.
Wow.
Which ended up becoming wildly popular. And I'm sorry that the name is escaping me, but I'll find
No, it's okay. We'll throw it in the show notes whenever you locate it. No worries.
Totally. And it ended up being a wildly successful for, I believe, this company that was actually old school company and kind of going out of business. And they thought of a new way to engage with people. And what I loved about it is that this brand sponsored series was not about putting the company at the center. So they really looked at, hey, what do we care about? What's aligned with our values? How can we tell stories around that are relevant to our target audience and attach our name to it, of course, because we're funding this in a way that's
Sure.
appropriate. But just almost instead of like doing the direct marketing thing, like, hey, we're here, be our customer, buy from us. It's like kind of going out through the side and then to the back door and this indirect way of marketing to people, right? Building a relationship and a connection with them that says, hey, this is cool. This is really cool that what they're doing. And it's almost like establishing the relationship in the community, the rapport and the trust first over a longer period of time. But then once you gain those customers, they're around forever.
Yeah, that's really cool. I love that example, Tamika, and definitely will be glad to share more information in the show notes. But I love the idea of building community, building trust first, and then sort of that loyalty, whether you're a company with a product or a service or a nonprofit that's delivering a particular solution, bringing people on that way. I think that's really tremendous. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
I would love to switch gears a little bit, but in the same vein of social impact and talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I know this is, please, Tamika, go for it.
I found it because it was going to drive me nuts. Okay, the company was Deluxe and they created Small Business Revolution.
Excellent. Deluxe Small Business Revolution. Thank you for finding that so quickly.
Okay, Google is always at our fingertips, right? Yes, and I knew this. Okay, they created, so now they say they're a business technology company, but I want to say that, so they created like actual paper checks.
Huh.
Yep. So, So they're a business company, so that's why they did that small business revolution. But yeah, they were starting to go out of business. Like, who uses checks anymore? I actually use checks, but
I do too.
but yeah, and so she totally like I read all about her story and I love it. She totally like blew up the marketing budget and said, "Hey, we need to like get on the ground level with small businesses around the company. We need to tell or around the country, tell their stories." And it ended up being like 5 or 6 seasons of episodes. Like,
Wow.
it's turned into a really big thing. So anyways, just to kind of close the loop on the whole brand funded content, I really think it's a risk. That's like a big picture type of thing. But if you are a CEO or an executive really wanting to, hey, maybe try something really different if you felt like nothing has worked for us. How do we get innovative here? I think there's something to be said. And also, when we talked about kind of bypassing traditional media, well, the case is kind of the same in terms of all of the streaming platforms that we have now and ability to really produce content and get it in front of people in so many different places. So I think we're going to continue to see more and more in that area.
Yeah, that's awesome. I am always marveling at brands that choose to sort of strike out on their own with content, sometimes unsuccessfully, but oftentimes surprisingly high quality, good storytelling, interesting ideas you wouldn't find anywhere else. And again, not a knock on traditional marketing or journalism or anything like that, but it is different and it is unique to that specific organization. So I love that recommendation. Thank you, Tamika. If you could, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your own experience with diversity, equity, and inclusion, building a diverse team, why that matters to you, and how those kinds of topics and overarching strategic priorities and just frankly the right thing to do as human beings, how does that influence your role as a business leader, and how should our business leaders who are listening be thinking about these in 2024?
I will always say first that I am certainly not a DEI expert or someone trained in this space. I think a lot of us, I'm certainly in a position where I feel like a lot of us since 2020 got tapped in a way as far as, hey, how can you help us in this area? And I say that with love because I actually chair my local chamber's DEI committee. But through that, I've learned a lot. And I think one piece that I can bring to the table is I'm always trying to find the right experts in that space to bring together. And I know you mentioned you spend a lot of time in the environmental space, and a lot of clients that we've worked with are in the areas of social justice or have certain initiatives and projects around DEI. So I've learned a lot through it that way as well. And I will say, I actually recently, like within the last 2 weeks, kind of dove into looking at some numbers around creative directors, around agency founders. And I found out that somewhere between, there's some discrepancy in the numbers, but somewhere in between 12 to 13% of creative directors are actually women, which is really astounding. And I think that's up from like 3% about 10 years ago. And then when I looked at creative directors who are Black women, that was 0.25%.
Wow.
So when I think about this question, it was really surprising to me because something that's always been at the forefront of my mind is how do we build a diverse team, and not just based on race, but based on geography, based on socioeconomic status, based on experiences, because we're in the role of communicating, of messaging, of storytelling, and our views and all of our inherent biases impact the way that we shape stories for other people. And anytime that I'm working on something, it's never just like, hey, me developing something for a client and sharing that. There's always got to be input, of course, from the client, but also from other members of my team. And doesn't even mean that necessarily a writer, but it's also just, you could be doing the bookkeeping and saying, hey, how does this land for you, right? Like, and just understanding how so many of us see things from a different perspective in a different way based on kind of our view of the world. So it was shocking to me. So that's been a priority for me, but then it was shocking to me to see how few creative directors who are actually making creative decisions when it comes to this type of work for brands. And then also seeing that I think something like 1% or less than 1% of ad agencies are founded by women.
Wow.
So yeah, it's just, those numbers are a bit shocking. And, you know, not that we necessarily fall into the category of ad agency, and that's where
Sure.
it gets a little bit tricky because the way the data reporting is. But I just said, hey, how can one or two or, you know, the same groups of people be telling these stories, right? When you think about who are we trying to communicate with, who are the consumers who need to know this story, but then also the diversity of the brands, of the employees within these companies. So there's a lot of work to be done in that area, but it's something that I'm always actively thinking about within my own business and something I've realized I always have to be intentional about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate your sharing that, Tamika. And you're right. There's been progress, but man, there's an awful long way to go. And I appreciate your willingness to speak to the subject and again, the leadership that you and others are showing and trying to make the communication, the storytelling that we're doing as representative of those audiences as possible and those perspectives. So thank you for sharing that.
Exactly. Absolutely.
What's one question about the communications or storytelling function in an organization that no one's asking and they should be asking?
Oof, I'm going to tell you that is a good question. I might flip that one back on you. What do you think? I would love to. I would love to know what you think.
Yeah. No, thank you for asking. I mean, I think for me, there is a tendency to, like, again, I'm speaking from the space that I've spent a lot of time in, which is environmental issues, food and agriculture specifically. And I think there is an interesting dichotomy. On the one hand, we see lots of new organizations wanting to get into the space of food and agriculture, climate change specifically. I have a solution to offer the marketplace. There are lots of organizations that want to work with farmers and ranchers who are really on the front lines from the standpoint of having farmlands that can sequester carbon and provide other beneficial environmental solutions. So there's a tremendous interest in engaging. On the other hand, I think there is sometimes, rather than sort of beginning to break ground and figure out, okay, what is it that we need to do to reach these individuals? How can we get to know them? There's sort of deer in the headlights is too strong of a word, but I think there's we don't know what to do. And so I see successful organizations surrounding themselves with people who know that audience, sort of to your point about DEI, right? It's who can we tap into on our team or in our network or whoever who might be able to speak to this and help me quickly get acclimated so that when we're ready to bring our solution to the market, our audience is ready and excited about what we have to offer. And so I think the question that I would urge more organizations to ask is how can we get creative at learning and quickly aligning with audiences that we desire to serve? And I think maybe sometimes there's just a fear or an uncertainty or a desire to go slow. And as you know, on some of these issues, it's really important to be prudent and to be thoughtful in our communication. On the other hand, existential threats like climate change, there's only so much time we can wait before detrimental impacts are predicted according to science to occur. So I think there needs to be a balance struck between walking and then running, and also really deeply wanting to have the human experience and insights from the audiences you desire to serve so that you can more quickly move to market. That would be how I would answer it.
Yeah, no, that's great. It was definitely far more profound than I was thinking.
It may be complete malarkey, by the way, but that's
I was okay. I wrote down here in my notes because I was like, okay, I'm thinking about communications teams that I know, and they're churning.
Yeah.
And I tend to find that if it's CSR, ESG within an organization, their access to communications and marketing teams is limited. That's just been my experience. They don't necessarily have their own person built in to help them message or communicate. So I think even before the questions that are even being asked is how do we bridge that, right? How do we bridge that gap? And I think that's often too why those teams tend to look to external teams where they can have a focused effort at communicating what it is they're doing and their new initiatives, because your internal teams are just overloaded with the day-to-day type of thing versus kind of more of that methodical type of work that you're talking about. Not that they're not doing that, but they're just doing it for other departments within the organization. So I'm always thinking about, hey, how can we bridge that and also prioritize this communications around our do-good initiatives, essentially, much more. And I feel like some of those conversations aren't even happening.
Yeah, I mean, Tamika, I think that's a really astute observation, and I would validate that, again, based on my limited experience. Just, I think within, especially large global organizations where you have a variety of different sort of business centers and priorities, there is this like structural silos. Again, no malicious intent or anything like that, but again, the bigger an organization, the more complex its goals and products and services, the harder it is to bring some of those social purpose stories forward. And so oftentimes I think what I see is, organizations will sort of lean on a press release as the extent to which we talk about our social good, where the possibilities are so much more profound and they're missing out on those opportunities that are right there in front of them.
Absolutely. No, you hit the nail on the head with that. Send out a press release drives me nuts.
That's a future episode. No, I love that. Well, let's talk a little bit about you. And as we sort of get into our final questions, Tamika, maybe talk a little bit about what you do to stay sane when you're navigating the ups and downs of purpose-driven work.
I'm still working on that one. Am I sane?
back at you right here. Yeah, same here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there can be a lot of uncertainty too, because this is probably one of those areas where budgets can frequently be cut, and that has that trickle down effect to us smaller businesses. But I mean, just like anything else, I'm going to think about, hey, self-care. Did I get to the gym? Did I eat healthy? Like all of the things. And I don't know that, I was going to say, I don't know that those challenges are so much different than when I wasn't necessarily doing this type of work. And in a lot of ways, I actually think that doing this purpose-driven work has me more motivated
Sure.
and more excited to like just go after opportunities. So like, and this is kind of corny, but it's just like, when you feel finally like settled in what you're supposed to do and in your purpose, that in a way it kind of naturally takes a lot of the stress away and uncertainty, because all of a sudden it's like, all of these things and opportunities are now coming to me because I'm doing the thing that I meant to do. So
yeah, I love that, Tamika, and I'm really happy to hear that. I think, like you said, self-care is so important. And my listeners know I've talked about my book, 7 Secrets of Highly Effective Social Impact Communicators. But one of the first things I talk about in the book is just the importance of aligning your personal values with your organization, or in your case, your clients' values. And because I think it alleviates so much friction and tension that otherwise exists. And when you know that the work that you're doing, the stories you're telling are helping contribute to good outcomes for a society, for those organizations, for the customers they serve, it is truly fun. And again, fun is something that I think oftentimes we don't ask. To go back to those questions that everyone should be asking, why are we having more fun? Like, what is keeping us from that fun?
I love that question. Why are we not having more fun? Yes. And the other one I was going to say was, why are we doing this?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
That's an important question. Like, why are we doing this again?
Yeah. Being willing to take a step back and question the sunk cost fallacy of we're this far in, so we might as well just finish the project or this deliverable, but you don't have to.
Right.
Yeah, really well said, Tamika. You talked about the Deluxe story as an example of a brand that sort of had this comeback story using this video series to engage its community. I'm curious if there is any other really profound story. It could be a movie or a show or a song that's really sort of spoken to you in the past year, that's really been a powerful force for good in your life as you think about storytelling.
Okay, well, I'm going to have to share, and not to get too deep on you, but I'm going to have to share because this is on the Academy Awards shortlist, and I usually don't pay attention to those things.
Yeah, sure.
It's called Beyond Utopia, and it's a documentary about defectors leaving North Korea.
Fascinating.
And they found there's a pastor living in South Korea. It's basically like an underground railroad, essentially, a network of people that run these routes and help people escape. And I mean, I wanted more of it because I was like, wait, I need to learn more about this.
Yeah, sure.
But also just because you have so little being captured coming out of North Korea, that it was like very fascinating to see this. And I think one of the producers was also a CIA lead for that region. Also, little context, I'm the type of person who loves stories where it's like, it just exposes me to something new.
Sure,
Totally
sure.
new that
Same here.
I've learned something new. I've learned a new perspective, and I'm just like, it broadens my mind and my viewpoints in a way, which I feel like is just, I wish more people actually valued that.
Yes. I mean, again, people like you are helping to expose the world to those kinds of stories that maybe will change somebody's mind or open them, like you said, to a different view they hadn't considered before. So I think that's a really powerful example. Thank you for sharing that.
Definitely check it out. I followed I think it was the director editor on Instagram. And she like followed me back and we were chatting. I'm like, I loved it. So I was all excited because I was like, wow, you're nominated for an Academy Award. How could you message me back?
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, that's a power of technology right there, which is something that we've talked about throughout this episode. So I know I love that. That's a great story. Well, Tamika, 2 last questions for you. You've been very generous with your time. The first would be, as people look back on the contributions of Tamika Bickham, what do you want them to say about you?
This is a good one. And it's also a bit ominous.
No, not intended to be dark, or like, what legacy are you building, basically, in the present, right? In the here and now.
I would expand on kind of that last point as far as that she really helped me think about things in a new way. Maybe not necessarily change my viewpoints or change my opinion, maybe change my opinion, but that's not necessarily the goal, but just open the minds and hearts of more people. And also just helping people feel more connected to one another.
Yeah, I love that. Helping people see new perspectives and building connection. I think those are really powerful values. I love that. Thank you for sharing.
And really made some cool stuff to look at too.
Well, Tamika, as we close, where can people go to learn more about you and your company?
Yes, I'm everywhere. So you can find us at tbmediagroup.com. We are also on all the socials, or feel free to connect with me. I'm like super active on LinkedIn, Tamika Bickham, or you can find me on Instagram, Tamika Bickham TV, and Facebook, everywhere. I'll be happy to connect.
Awesome. Well, Tamika Bickham is founder, CEO, and creative director of TB Media Group. Tamika, it's been a pleasure. I really hope our paths cross in the future.
Me too. Thank you.
Thank you. That'll do it for today's episode of Secrets of Social Impact Communicators. As always, check out the show notes for more about Tamika and TB Media Group. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye. Well, that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Again, check out the show notes where you can find everything you need to know about Tamika Bickham and TB Media Group. Please check out her website and social media channels, especially LinkedIn, where she spends a lot of time. Again, rate and review today's show and stay tuned for the next episode. Thank you so much, as always, to our editor, Lee Williams. And until next time, remember that social impact work is soul work. Lead like you live.